We've established that cardio is good, but how much cardio do you need for longevity, to potentially live longer? Like in a pragmatic sense, like how much should you actually do? And this is not just going to be lip service, this is actual data that we can back up. So let's break it down. I put a link down below for 30% off of Seed's Daily Symbiotic. I don't really recommend probiotics very often, but Seed has a very, very interesting one, and that's a 30% off discount link. So they have a capsule inside of a capsule. So it has a prebiotic and a probiotic in one. So if you're trying to really make a dent in your gut microbiome and make a serious change, that's probably the only probiotic I would ever recommend. So again, that link down below will get your hands on that for a 30% off discount, and then you can try taking it every day. So because it's a symbiotic, that means that it has like a multi-stage delivery system. So it has a prebiotic that breaks down, which is going to help feed the gut bacteria and help feed the probiotic, which breaks down a little bit later in digestion with their dual capsule technology. So anyhow, that link is down below for 30% off with Seed. So with this, we first look at a study that was published in the Journal of Aging Research. This is quite fascinating, but at the same time, kind of a no-brainer when you think about it. They took a look at active people versus non-active people, and then athletes versus non-athletes. And they essentially looked at them over a lifetime. And what they found is, well, kind of a no-brainer, that regular physical activity ultimately led to about a 0.4 ranging to a 6.9 year increase in lifespan. Okay, so essentially it helped improve their life. But what they also found is that it was close to a 4-year increase in their lifespan, even when adjusting for all-cause mortality like confounders. So what that means is that, like, factoring in everything, diseases, all this, people that were more active lived longer. Well, again, that's no real surprise. So then we look at the athletes versus non-athletes. And of course, we saw that even people that were active, athletes lived longer than non-athletes, even if the non-athletes were active or regularly active. So there's a lot of misinformation out there that says that athletes push their bodies so hard that it could be counterproductive. But this kind of flies in the face of that. Athletes seem to do better. However, there's a caveat. The athletes that really seemed to live longer were more aerobic-oriented athletes. Athletes that were pushing their VO2 max. They seemed to live longer. Now, what we do know about aerobic work is it reduces oxidative stress. So that's an important thing when it comes down to like DNA damage, when it comes down to just combating free radicals. It reduces coronary artery calcium scores. So that's a very big one when it comes down to cardiovascular disease. Reduces inflammation, and it can also just improve the endurance of our cells, like our mitochondrial function. We think mitochondria is only muscle related, but mitochondria just provides energy for our body. It's our energy powerhouse, and that is involved in organ function, brain function, everything, right? So even down to our circulatory system. Okay, well, that doesn't answer the question of how much we should actually do, and does higher intensity actually matter? You see, it does matter. And if you look at the data, you see that higher intensity seems to be better than moderate intensity. Check this out. There's a relatively new study published in 2022 that was published in Circulation. It took a look at 116,000 people over 30 years, okay? And they divided them into like different groups based upon their level of exercise intensity and how many minutes per week they exercised. Ultimately, here's what they found. 75 minutes to 149 minutes of vigorous cardiovascular activity, aerobic activity, led to a 19% decrease in all-cause mortality and a 31% decrease in mortality related to cardiovascular disease. Okay, remember that. Now next, moderate aerobic activity done for 149 minutes up to, or 150 minutes rather, up to 299 minutes led to also a 19% reduction in all-cause mortality, but only a 25% reduction in cardiovascular disease risk. Am I saying don't do moderate activity? Not at all, do it. But the vigorous activity had better outcomes with less time, okay, plain and simple. And then if you further break down the data, you actually find that if people were doing vigorous activity, like intense activity, for 150 to 299 minutes instead of moderate, they squeaked out an extra 2 to 4% decrease in all-cause mortality and an extra 3% or so in cardiovascular disease risk mortality. As a matter of fact, it ranged all the way up to 13% more improvement in cardiovascular disease risk mortality. So if you're really trying to keep away the cardiovascular disease monster as a potential cause of death, then it seems like higher intensity cardio might actually be good. Now, after this 300-minute mark, the results that you get start to be a little bit more like not worth it per se, because that's a lot of exercise intensity. So what we're finding here is that, you could walk away from this and ultimately grab that, okay, I'll do as much high intensity cardio as possible and I'm gonna get the maximum effect. But if it takes away from your life and it takes away from your ability to craft good meals and have a pleasant life, then that doesn't exactly help you. The point here is that you're better off to do 75 to 149 minutes of high intensity cardio per week than you are trying to drag that out doing moderate work. The hard stuff always seems to win, right? Like, it's not fun to do 20 minutes of high intensity interval training a few times per week. No, it's brutally painful. It's a heck of a lot easier to go out for a jog or a bike ride at that moderate range. But if we want that benefit, we got to look at VO2 max. So what I would recommend is you craft something like this. If you are someone that likes to do interval style training, I recommend that you do 20 to 25 minutes of interval training 4 days per week. Okay, so you do a warm-up period and then do maybe 1 minute on, 1 minute off, or maybe do something like 30 seconds on, 1 minute off, might be a little bit better. Here's the caveat. You should only really count the minutes that you're pushing hard as your vigorous activity. So let me put it like this. If you do 30 minutes of intervals and you do 30 seconds on and 1 minute off, well, you're really only going to count the 30 seconds on towards your vigorous activity. So if you ended up doing 15 total minutes when you add up your 30-second bursts, that's your amount of vigorous activity. That's what you want to pay attention to. However, that's pretty extreme, right? That's a very high intense workload that's much more anaerobic than aerobic. A better solution would be to maybe go do 400-meter repeats, or maybe some kind of interstitial range where you're not quite sprinting, but you're also not jogging. You're in that terrible, terrible phase, that's that gray area that is just miserable to do. And that way it's a little bit easier to count. So you could do something like 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. Or you could just straight up go for a run for 20 or 30 minutes, 4 days per week, or do something like a rower, but you want to get yourself into that zone 3 occasionally. Zone 2 has huge properties as well when it comes down to longevity, but zone 3 and zone 4 are going to train that VO2 max, whereas zone 2 might be good for mitochondrial biogenesis, fat adaptation, and utilizing alternative fuel substrates. So periodize your training accordingly, but you don't need to go more than like 150 minutes of higher intensity activity per week to get the best longevity outcome. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. We'll see you tomorrow.